Today, we're digging into a new piece of research that challenges us to rethink the very timeline of a police shooting. It's built on a fascinating idea that the most critical decisions aren't made in the heat of the moment, but maybe months or even years before anyone ever arrives on the scene. Let's get into it. So, when you think about it, we usually assume the story starts with a 911 call, right? Or with that final tragic encounter. But what if that's all wrong? What if the real story starts much, much earlier, in a place we rarely think to look? Every year in the US, police fatally shoot roughly 1,100 people. Now, that number drives an incredible amount of debate, research, and soul-searching. But here's the kicker. This paper suggests we might be starting our analysis at completely the wrong point in time. To really get what they're saying, we have to look upstream from that final encounter. Most of the analysis focuses on the immediate details, the suspect's behavior, the officer's perception, what happened in those split seconds. But we're going to rewind the clock and look at the system that put those individuals in that situation to begin with. See, here's part of the problem. Right now, the folks who study the criminal justice system are kind of siloed off from each other. You've got the policing scholars over here analyzing use of force, and then way over there, you have corrections scholars studying sentencing and what happens after a conviction. These two groups, they rarely talk to each other. And this image here really nails it. It shows these two parallel worlds of research operating completely independently. The big idea we're exploring today, this Avertogenic framework, is designed to be the bridge that finally connects them, linking decisions made in a courtroom to lethal encounters happening out on the street. All right, so how do we actually build that bridge and connect these two worlds? Well, the researchers came up with a powerful and brand new concept. They call it an avertogenic death. And here's the definition. It's a fatal police encounter that was made possible because of an earlier court decision that left that person in the community. It draws a direct line from a choice made in the past, sometimes years in the past, to a tragic outcome in the future. Now, the easiest way to get your head around this term is to think about medicine. You may have heard of iatrogenic harm. That's harm that is caused by a medical treatment. Avertogenic harm is the total opposite. It's harm that happens because of the absence of an intervention. In this case, the absence of incapacitation for a high-risk individual. Okay, so let's walk through how this actually happens step by step. First, a court decision is made that avoids or reduces incarceration. Pretty simple. That means the person has more time at risk in the community. It's just a numbers game. Now, for some people, that increases the probability of a high-stakes police encounter, and a tiny, tiny fraction of those encounters might escalate to lethal force. It's a chain of probabilities. I know this all sounds a bit theoretical, so let's look at a real-world case the paper uses to illustrate the point. There was a convicted robber named Jonathan Magana. He was released from prison, and later he got into a violent shootout with police and was killed. The paper's logic here is really straightforward. If he had been serving a longer sentence, that specific tragic encounter simply could not have happened when it did. But this isn't just a theory they're floating out there. The researchers actually took this idea and built a pretty sophisticated computer model to see how these decisions might play out on a massive scale. They started with a cohort of 1.1 million felony convictions, which is huge. It's roughly the number you see in the entire US every year. And then they ran a simulation to see what would happen to this group over the next 10 years, all under different sentencing policies. So in their simulation, they tweaked a variable. They imagined a new policy that cut the incarceration rate for this huge group by 6.4 percentage points. In other words, more people who otherwise would have been in prison are now out in the community. And what happened when they did that? What was the outcome? Well, the model projected an additional 20.6 avertogenic deaths over that 10-year period for that group. It's a small number in the grand scheme of things, but it's a measurable increase tied directly to that policy change. And this graph from the paper, wow, it just lays it all out so clearly. Look at the horizontal axis on the bottom. As you move to the right, that means fewer people are being incarcerated. Now look at the vertical axis. That's the number of expected avoidogenic deaths. See how all those lines trend upward? The model shows a really clear relationship. As incarceration goes down, these specific kinds of deaths are predicted to go up. So, the multi-million-dollar question is, what do we do with this information? Does this just mean we should lock more people up? Well, the researchers are extremely clear on this point. No. And let me be super clear, because the researchers are. This is absolutely not an argument for mass incarceration. They see it as a tool that's designed to make a hidden trade-off visible to policymakers so that we can have a more honest conversation.
And we have to remember the harms of locking people up they're massive and they're well known. We're talking huge financial costs, families and communities being torn apart, and incredible barriers for people trying to get a job and rebuild their lives. Those costs are very, very real.
This quote from the paper just nails the entire point. The appropriate response is not to ignore either side of the ledger, but to measure both and make the trade-offs visible. It's not about ignoring one side of the coin. It's about finally being able to see both sides at the same time and make more informed decisions.
And this research is really just the beginning. The paper lays out this whole roadmap for what comes next. It calls for things like data linkage, which is basically just a fancy way of saying we need to connect the dots to link sentencing data directly to policing outcomes, so we can finally study the justice system as the one interconnected system that it is.
Which leaves us with this final, really big question. If we can make these hidden trade-offs, like avertogenic deaths, visible, can we finally start to design a justice system that's actually aware of its full impact, both the intended and the unintended consequences? It's a massive challenge, but it's one this research insists we have to start tackling.